I'd like to welcome everybody to the Park West Camera Club. We have a guest speaker tonight. Preceding that, we have a curtain raiser by one of our members, and we'll get to that shortly as well. Okay, to introduce tonight's guest speaker, we call on co-chair of the program committee, Alice Soma. Alice?
So I met Chris a number of years ago with Natalie on our photo trip with him, and it was a really great experience. And I'm so happy that he's back again because we always get something new from him. And I'd just like to read a little bit about Chris, his bio. Chris Murray is a photographic artist, instructor, and writer working primarily in the landscape of his home, the woods, lakes, mountains, and streams of New York State. His work has appeared in several magazines, including Elements, On Landscape, Popular Photography, Adirondack Life, Life in the Finger Lakes, and the New York State Conservationists, among others. Chris leads photography workshops through the Adirondack Photography Institute. Chris's interest in photographing landscapes is derived mainly from his love of natural world, the same love that led him to choose geology as his first profession. In photography, his goal is to make images that are not a literal documentation of place, but rather a creative expression of his relationship with the subject. Chris's photography tends towards the quiet and intimate, with a creative focus on simplicity and detail. Chris resides in Clayton, New York, and you can find him online. And his email address is www.chrismurrayphotography.com. So we're looking forward to seeing your work, Chris.
Well, thank you, Alice, and thank you all for having me again as a guest speaker. I was looking at what presentation to give, and I had one selected. And then about 4 days ago, I realized that I'd already given that one to you. So, I think this is my third time, and so I was like, "Oh boy!" But it's a good thing I checked. So I have a different presentation tonight.
Oh, Chris, let me just mute everyone. Hold on a second.
Okay.
And now unmute yourself.
Done. Okay.
Got it.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Marlene. So the presentation I have tonight is it's a little more conventional than the other ones you've seen. And tonight I'm going to be talking about black and white photography. Most of my work these days is in black and white. So I'll be talking about the reason for that, the appeal of black and white, and the advantages I feel that it offers photographers. I'll be discussing which scenes work best in black and white and why, as well as those that don't. I'll also be talking about learning to see in black and white. It's a color world, and learning to see it in a series of gray tones. And even though I photograph nature, the things I'll be talking about tonight, the principles of black and white, it could apply to anything, any genre of photography, really. So that's the beauty of it. So it'll be about a 45-minute to an hour at the most presentation, and then we should have time at the end for questions and discussion and all that good stuff. So let me share my screen here. Okay, so black and white artistry. So as we all know, the black and white format is nothing new. It's as old as photography itself, which is going on almost 200 years now. And for the first 100 plus years of photography, black and white was the only option available. But even with the advent of color through the last half of the 20th century, and now even in the digital age, black and white remains a very popular choice among photographers. I think one of the main reasons for that is it's the creative freedom it offers. Its lack of reality just offers a greater latitude for interpretation. I think that's reflected in this quote from Elliot Erwitt when he said, "Color is descriptive, black and white is interpretive." And I think that's largely true, although I would amend this quote. In fact, I don't quite believe it. I would say color is descriptive or interpretive. I think color can be interpretive. But black and white is always interpretive for sure. And it's that interpretive freedom, I think, that is what is attractive to so many photographers. Just start with a couple real world examples before I get into the nitty gritty of it. For instance, this is a scene from a pond in the Adirondacks from a few years ago. It was late summer and it was late afternoon, and the sun was getting low in the sky over to the right. And so it cast this lovely side or directional light on the shoreline across the pond. Of course, you do have the reflections, but whenever I make a photo, and everybody should do this, whether you're photographing in black and white and color, whether you're photographing people, whether you're photographing nature, you ask yourself either consciously or subconsciously, why am I making the photograph? What's attracting me to the scene? And when I looked at the scene when I was present, I knew right away I would make it a black and white photograph. Because the things I were responding to were, number one, the tonal contrast. With that soft light coming in, some trees were lit, other trees were in shadow. So you had that areas of brightness and darkness, which work very well for black and white photography. I'll talk more about that as we go throughout. So it had that tonal or brightness contrast. Also interesting shapes. I love the shapes of these pine trees, very triangular, a lot of them as well. And finally, as I mentioned before, you had this nice quality of light to the scene. Color didn't even come into the equation. It didn't really register with me as well. And when that happens, then I get an idea that, all right, well, this could make for a strong black and white photograph. And so, upon working that was the raw file, and this is the black and white version of it as well. Or another one here. This is April from a lake where I used to live in Syracuse. It's April in New York State, so as we know, there's not a lot of color around that time of year. But there are many elements to the scene that attracted my attention that work well in black and white. First, again, you had that tonal contrast. You had the bright sky, and then you had the dark land and the reflection. Also, an interesting shape here. The reflection of the land kind of looks like almost like an hourglass that's been tipped over. So I like the interesting shape here. And also interesting texture or detail in the sky and the reflection of the sky and the water. All of those elements would really work to make it a strong black and white photograph. Again, color, and there is color in the image, doesn't even figure into the equation. And so you can wind up with this final processed image, right? In each of these images, examples, the images to me work a lot better in black and white, a lot stronger, a lot more compelling, and a lot more impact. Another just simple one, this simple little vine climbing up a trunk of a tree a couple summers ago. In this case, that light coming in from the left-hand side created a nice side light on it. And here you had the color contrast between the bright green vine and that brownish gray bark. And I knew I would be able to manipulate that in processing a bit more contrast. And that's something I'm going to be discussing a lot through the presentation tonight, manipulation of these tonal relationships in black and white. So you go from this raw file to something like this, where you can create that contrast between the bright green leaves of the vine and the trunk of the tree. And finally, this one surprised me. It's from one of the gorges south of Ithaca in the Finger Lakes region. The clearing storm had left this mist hanging in the gorge, as you can see in the center background of the photograph. And it works beautifully in color. It has a very primeval feel to it. But because I couldn't help myself, I just saw that dark rock, and I wanted to see what that would look like with those bright green leaves, and made this image. It's not an infrared image. It's just manipulating or adjusting the brightness of the various colors. And I'm a sucker for the silver tones in black and white photography. I'm not really drawn to the bright whites and the dark blacks. I really love the middle. And if you think of Ansel Adams' zone system, if you've heard about it, I'm kind of drawn to the middle part of that zone system, those beautiful grays and silvers in the middle. Again, this image, it works in both ways, but they each have a different feel, and that's the point. It's, again, what are you trying to emphasize, or what feeling am you trying to evoke in the viewer? So really, what are the advantages of black and white photography that we can talk about tonight? First is the inherent lack of reality. I'm going to go back one there. The inherent lack of reality. It creates this freedom to do whatever you want with the scene. In color photography, if we think of color landscapes, there's certain norms, certain laws that you have to obey, right? I mean, a blue sky has to be blue. unless it's a themed contest like you were discussing earlier. But no, I'm just kidding. Blue sky has to be blue, grass has to be green, sunsets have to be red and orange. But in black and white, you can manipulate those tonal relationships. A sky can be white, it can be pure black. You can manipulate the tonal relationships, you can manipulate the contrast and the brightness or the luminosity in ways that you just can't with color photography. So it's kind of an abstract, by throwing out reality, you don't have to deal with that question of, has this been photoshopped? Because clearly it has been, right? So I love that, again, that abstract quality to it. I feel it opens up a world of interpretive possibilities that you don't have available to you in color. Another advantage is you're eliminating the visual dominance of color. When you think of the various visual elements, you've got line, you've got shape, form, and texture. Color is one of the visual elements as well. It just happens that these days I have a deeper and stronger affinity for all the other visual elements other than color. I'm more attracted to line, I'm more attracted to shapes and textures than I am color. And black and white photography emphasizes those and obviously de-emphasizes color. And I think that working in black and white can help make you a better photographer for a number of reasons. First, you learn how colors translate to different levels of brightness values in black and white. You can see beyond the color of light, what I call the color of light to the quality of light. When you think about photographing at the golden hours of, morning or evening, especially in landscape photography, everybody loves, the beautiful sunrises and sunsets, but that's all about color. But I love the light before the sun sets, before the sky turns those magnificent colors. When you get that low angle light coming in, it can just create such wonderful, dramatic scenes. So, it's really more about quality, obviously, in black and white than it is about the color of light. And I think when you realize that, you start to see light better. You work better with light when you start responding to the quality rather than its color. And finally, you can learn the essential building blocks of composition, like I was saying before. You start seeing everything as lines, as shapes, forms, and textures. When you photograph a landscape, I don't think I'm photographing a waterfall. I'm not photographing a tree. I'm not photographing a mountain. I'm photographing shapes and lines, form. That's really what I'm responding to. So let's go through each of these in a little bit more detail. Let's talk about the freedom from reality that I was talking about. This was a scene one early morning in fall a couple of years ago up in the Adirondacks. Nice reflection. In color, it's pretty. But I wanted to see what I would do with it in black and white. And I'm not into big or high contrast black and white photography, but those dark trees on the left-hand side, I made those black and just lightened everything else up. This is kind of inspired by a photographer I had seen on Instagram. And so I just wanted to have my hand in it. It's not a favorite photo of mine. It doesn't appear on my website. But it's a good example of, reality versus what you can do in black and white and everything in between these, because, and I'll talk about this more later, converting to black and white is so much more than just removing color. There's so much more that's involved in it when you work, whether you're working in Lightroom or Silver FX Pro or Photoshop or any other, processing software. It doesn't matter which. There's so many ways you can make a black and white photograph, and you can make so many different black and white photographs that all look very different. I mean, the same scene, but process them in so many different ways. They're still all monochrome, but they have completely different feels. So it's much more than just removing color. Oops. Here's another one. One of my favorite photographs. You may remember this from an earlier presentation. Pine needles on snow. This is the raw file. Just drawn to this wonderful assemblage of lines, these fallen pine needles laying on the ground on frozen snow. When I saw this scene, again, I was drawn to those lines. Color had nothing to do with it. Didn't care about the green, didn't care about the blue in the snow. And so when I converted to black and white, not only did I convert it, but I also got rid of any texture in the snow and pretty much got rid of all the gray tones in this instance. So it's just black and white. And in doing so, I rendered it really pretty much an abstract image. And it's a great example of what I love about black and white photography. You make it a new reality. You know, you take this reality that anybody would see and you do something much more subjective and much more interpretive to turn it into your own new reality. I think that's the real appeal of black and white. Clouds, dramatic storm clouds, you know, in color, in black and white. You can make, you know, really add more drama to it. Or a scene like this, you know, just a bog up in the Adirondacks one fall. I just like the light on these cattails or these reeds. You have those warm colored reeds, the tans, and then you have these bluish gray dead tree trunks and the shapes in those. It works wonderfully in color. And in fact, I do prefer the color version. However, playing around in black and white came up with something like this, darkening the blue of the trees and bringing up those yellows. And you really see the reflection of the light on those reeds, as well as little white flowers, you know, in the middle part of the image, right? So again, you know, going from reality or something close to it to your own inner reality. And really, you know, if we practice photography as art, if we do, you don't have to. Photography serves many different purposes. But if we're interested in treating photography as art, isn't that really what it's all about? It's more our own inner reality, our way of seeing and relating to the world rather than objective appearances. Seeing beyond color. Yeah, I think sometimes color can be a crutch. Again, I'm speaking more from a landscape photographer's perspective. You know, there's so much beautiful color out there in the world, especially when you think of sunrises like this one or a sunset, that, you know, the color alone can make the image spectacular. Even if the composition or the subject matter is fairly mundane. This is just a scene close to where I live now in the Thousand Islands. Compositionally, it's nothing much. You know, it's just water, some islands, a shoreline, and clouds, right? The star of the show is the myriad beautiful colors of sunrise. But it's very easy to do. You know, there was really no compositional thought going into it. Nothing that was, you know, really required much skill. It's just a very obvious photograph. I think color can often do that. So a scene of false hellebore in a state park near here I photographed one spring. I remember this actually. This was in April of 2020, so the pandemic was raging. I saw this group of false hellebore and made this image. And it, you know, the raw file is beautiful. I mean, the green color is gorgeous, but what I was drawn to were again the shapes, lines, and especially the texture in the leaves. But also, and when you look at the raw file, it's subtle, but it's there. The tonal differences, you know, the way the light was hitting these leaves, sometimes you got a little bit more reflection, so those parts seem a bit brighter. Other parts of the leaves seem a little bit darker. So there is that tonal variation, subtle as it may be, in the leaves. Well, that can be emphasized when you convert to black and white. So again, what I was talking about earlier, you know, I was drawn to the shapes, lines, the textures, the tonal contrast, not the green. And so we go from an image like that to something like this, something much more, I don't know, just silvery. It's just so luscious. I don't know. It's just one of my favorite images. And look how the dewdrops stand out in this image, you know, versus here. It's a slightly different image from a composition standpoint. You see those water drops. Now that you know they're there, but you don't really see them in color. But I noticed this earlier. They stand out more, the black and white version. So again, it's about your own inner reality. And here's another one. One of my favorite images. This is from a beaver pond close to where I live, November a few years ago. I noticed in the pond you had all these dead reeds in the previous season, and then reflections. And then you also had the reflection of the opposite shoreline. You can see some of the leftover muted fall colors in the water. But what I was really drawn to were those reeds and the reflections. And they're bright compared to the kind of orangish brown background in the water. They're bright. And so you had that tonal contrast. So I knew it would make for a very strong black and white photograph. So I converted to black and white, and I darkened that background to bring out those bright reeds more, and came up with this. And the name of this photograph is hieroglyphics, right? Because the moment I saw this on my screen, it looked like some kind of ancient language or some other kind of code, some kind of form of communication, right? And that reflection is still there, and it's interesting, especially in the upper third of the photo. You do get those tree trunks reflected. They're interesting, but really, converting it to black and white, I just really made the image more closer to what I was feeling and experiencing when I saw the scene. It works in color, and this is just the raw file. It could be processed, still be a cool image, but in black and white, it becomes something else. And finally, just a fall image. Pretty colors. We got those lovely harmonious blues and, cool blues and warm orange tones, but then an obvious conversion to black and white. So just another way of looking at it. So understanding the fundamentals of composition. And when I say fundamentals, again, what I was talking about earlier, exploring the visual elements more, seeing the world as a series of lines and or shapes and or forms and or textures, right? Don't see it for what it literally is, see what it represents. So some examples, just some ice and open water here in the St. Lawrence River a few years ago, just photographed from a little footbridge above. It's not often we see triangles in nature, you see them a lot in architecture and things like that, but it's not often we see them in the natural world. And so, the contrast between the water, which I made black, and then the white ice, but also just these wonderful angles. There's lines here and there's shape, right? So it's just really a study in contrast, line and shape. Who cares that it's water and ice? That's not what I see. I see lines and shapes and contrast. Another one of these rocks, which nice even lighting on them, but you can see light and shadow. So it gives the rocks that form. And when I say form is really just the three-dimensional equivalent of shape. Obviously, it's a three-dimensional world, but when we're looking at a photograph, everything is now two-dimensional. Well, the use of light, or light can be used to introduce that feeling of three-dimensionality in the photograph. And here you see this in these rocks. Also interesting texture on the rocks, as well as interesting shapes as well. And you still have that strong tonal contrast. Lines. I have no idea what kind of plant this is, but when I saw it in the snow, just wonderful contrast. But look at these fantastic, beautiful lines throughout the photograph. Just looking down at my feet, seeing these pine needles for texture, and then these roots of a white pine just running through them. Right? Just a very simple image, but just a study in line and texture. Or this one of snow from the Adirondacks a few years ago. What I love about this is there's no sense of scale. We're not even sure what it is. It is snow. It's not sand. Could be a dune, but this is snow, and has a very sensual quality. The quality of light hitting it, and this was midday. But just the way the light was hitting it, and then adjusting, pretty much reducing contrast, but also reducing exposure in processing, resulted in this. So this is an image I worked on a long time. I kept it in the bluish color. I liked blue because it was snow and it was cool. But it wasn't until I converted it to black and white and darkened it quite a bit that it really became something else. So again, it's a great example of form. You can feel these kind of rounded forms in the snow. And again, it has a very almost sensual, almost like a nude kind of quality to it. Again, this is the freedom and the interpretive freedom that black and white affords. Another one of just form, low angles light at sunset, just lighting these rocks up from the left. And so you get that feeling of dimensionality in these rocks. It's kind of a flooded landscape here, leading your eye to those islands in the distance. It's another great but another great candidate for a black and white photograph. Interesting texture in the sky as well. And finally, lines, in this case, diagonal lines, which when you see diagonal lines in photographs, they tend to be very energetic because it feels like something is falling, right? And I like the different directions of diagonal lines in this photograph. Yes, it's trees. Yes, it's a reflection, but it's all about line. And when you strip out color, you reduce it and you put it in black and white, you're really reducing it to its most fundamental elements, in this case, lines. That's what I love about it. It simplifies. All right, so black and white photography is, or I say should be, a planned and deliberate creative choice. It should not be an afterthought, ideally, or an attempt to fix a boring image. And I think we've all been there before. You know, we're working on image and we're processing it and it just seems boring. And then we say, well, what the hell? Let's convert to black and white and see what happens, you know. And sometimes that does work, I admit. Most often it doesn't, because boring content is boring content, whether it's in color or black and white, usually. But ideally, black and white should be a planned and deliberate creative choice at the time of capture. This is an image I made years ago before I did a lot of black and white photography. I was doing some, but not a lot. And I made this image on a spring day. And in color, it's beautiful. But later on in processing it, and this is the processed image, I looked at it. I was like, well, I made this image. What I was drawn to was not the clouds or the water or the reflections. It was these shooting through this filigree of branches, right, in this design. A fellow photographer, Mark Bowie, who I do workshops with, said this has a complex simplicity to it, which I like. I never heard that term before. But I know what he means when I look at this photograph. And I thought, well, you know, if I'm drawn to these lines, there's a different way to process this photograph, a different way to see it. So I converted it to black and white and just made the background low contrast, just kind of lightened it. So it just kind of fades away. So now the viewer's eye is just definitely drawn to the lines of these branches. There's no doubt as to what you should be seeing. If you think of that Elliot Erwitt quote from before, this is descriptive. Right? This is certainly interpretive. It was an afterthought. It worked in this image, in this instance, but it's not the ideal way to go. So let's talk about scenes that work and don't work in black and white. So what are the qualities of scenes that do work? Well, first, you have to have an interesting or strong tonal or brightness contrast. I think that's the main thing. You need to have areas of light and dark, or you can have color contrasts. If you have different colors in the photograph, and we tend to always do, oftentimes, not always, but those can be manipulated in processing to create tonal contrast between them. I'll show examples of that a little bit later on. Look for interesting or strong patterns, like you see here in these pine needles on water. Interesting texture, strong shapes. Again, all the visual elements other than color. Contrasting or juxtaposed elements. And something where color is not the major player, obviously. Some scenes that work, right? This was a raw file. I just love these reeds and the reflections. It works in color. It's fine in color. The green actually does play a role in this, but it also works, I think, even better in black and white, right? It's very graphical, very simple. You've got these horizontal lines in the water from the ripples, and then you have, of course, the vertical lines from the reeds. The contrast between the dark rock and the bright water in this little cascade. Obviously, there's your tonal variations, your brightness variations. Similar to that false hellebore scene, you've got these bright green ferns, but different shades of green, the way the light's hitting them. This can make for a very strong black and white image. Also, wonderful shapes as well. Or this scene in the Adirondacks, you have this low evening light on the mountains in the bottom, creating light and shadow, which is perfect food for black and white photography. And then you also have the sky, the stratus clouds, the bright clouds against the blue sky, creating contrast as well. Something like this, right? So all these scenes, yes, they work in color, but very strong. They work in black and white as well. Talk about juxtaposition. Sun was setting behind this tree, so this cliffside, which is quite a bit back from this tree, was in shadow, but then this tree was still lit up in the sunlight. Had to do some removal of elements in this because this was the strongest lens I had, but this is the raw file. But again, shadow and light, perfect for black and white. And it rhymed. Anyway, yeah. And of course, winter obviously lends itself to black and white photography. Obviously, or most of the time, not most, a lot of the time, winter seems monochromatic anyway. So it's not a stretch to imagine it and work in black and white. This was a scene that was about color in a way. The pink granite that we see up here and blues and blue lichen, stuff like that. So there is nice color in this image. This works both ways. It also makes for a nice abstract black and white image as well. There's the stand of aspen trees. It works in color, but really what is color giving you here? Not much. So black and white. Scenes that don't work. Essentially, pretty much any scene that's defined primarily by color. It seems obvious, but as we talk a little bit later about visualizing a color world in black and white and learning to see in black and white, it's not so simple. But here's a scene I photographed primarily because color. This rock face in the Adirondacks and all these different colored lichen. It's almost like modern art. Nature had done some kind of modern art here. So, not a spectacular image in color either, but it has to be in color. That was the defining quality of it. Or a simple scene like this at dawn, in shadow, you had this blue mist in the valley below and these blue mountains against that pink orange sky, right? It's all about color. There are interesting shapes here in the mountains, and you can see that. It could work in black and white. I tried it, but color is the player here, and that's what really caught my eye. A simple scene like this, fall colors on a fallen log. If you convert this to black and white, it all just looks the same. There's no distinguishing between leaves, between wood, between pine needles. It all looks the same. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Or this one, just this, whatever tree this is. The yellow leaves are nice, but what I was really drawn to are these lichen-colored, just gnarly branches. And you got these cedar or pine trees behind them, creating that nice backdrop. So you got the yellow color. It's an autumn image, but really drawn to that filigree of branches. You see it in color, but when you convert to black and white, you see those yellow leaves, they're bright, but you lose the branches in amongst the trees behind it. And nothing you can do can bring them out. So again, that choice is, I talked about before, asking yourself, what is it that I'm photographing? Why am I making the photograph? What do I want to emphasize? So learning to see in black and white, I think it's a difficult thing. It's a lifelong thing I'm finding. I still, from time to time, more than from time to time, often will see a scene that I think will work in black and white. I make the image, and then I get home and I process the raw file and realize it doesn't work. So, if you think about it, in the days of film, we had to learn to see the world in black and white. Your camera was loaded with either color or black and white film, and you had to choose that at the outset. In the digital area, it's much more easier than that. We can shoot in color and decide later if the image would look better in black and white. And while it's convenient, I think that choice can be a crutch, and it can prevent us from learning to see in black and white. Right? I think there's a true advantage to learning how to visualize what the image is going to look like in monochrome. One thing I do these days, and one thing I would recommend for those who maybe want to explore black and white, is you can change your camera. Most new cameras now, when you look at your playback and your image review on the back, you can set that to monochrome. And it's a good way of, while you're out in the field, kind of training. It's a help. It helps you to learn to see the world of black and white. I would say be careful with that because all that's doing is stripping color. As I mentioned later on, black and white conversion is much more than stripping color. But, setting your screen, your playback to black and white or monochrome, it can help you learn over time. You say, oh, well, that looked good in color, but not in black and white. Or yes, that does look good in monochrome. So anyway, just a little hint or a tip there if you want to start working in black and white. So learn to see in black and white. In order to do that, we really need to understand the role of color and what happens to colors when we convert them to gray tones. That's really what we're doing, right? So learning how colors translate to grayscale. and also learning how colors can be manipulated in processing to affect tonal contrast or tonal relationships. We can create that tonal contrast if it's not there. Just a quick review of color basics, and we all know this, right? Color is really defined by hue, which are your different colors. Saturation, we know what saturation is, and we know what brightness and luminosity is. However, when it comes to black and white photography, only one of these matters, and that's brightness and luminosity. Hue and saturation do not play a role. This was an interesting little exercise somebody showed me once, and I liked it. It was really eye-opening. If we look at these three distinct colors, blue, red, and yellow, according to Photoshop, these are all the same brightness, even though they may not look the same brightness to our eyes. I think to most people, the blue looks darker than the yellow, certainly, probably even darker than the red. But according to Photoshop, these are the same brightness. And if we desaturate them, they look the same in grayscale, even though they look to our eyes like the brightness is different, but it's really not. They look the same as in grayscale. All right, so oftentimes, when we're in the field, we can see varying colors, and oftentimes, if for some reason they're not working in monochrome, it's because they may be of this very similar or same brightness. And so in color, they're distinguishable, but when we convert them to grayscale, all of a sudden they become indistinguishable from one another. Here's a real world example I made a few years ago. Just this little overhanging branch, this maple, these beautiful red leaves, and you see the deep green or green in the distant background in the opposite shoreline. The brightness just happened to be the same. In color, obviously two very different hues, but you can see in monochrome, very similar, right? Very similar grayscale, despite how different they look in color. And that's because the brightness is the same. The hue is different, the brightness is different. Or the brightness is the same, I should say. And again, it's not about saturation. Out of curiosity, I desaturated that image and still does the same thing, right? You can't really distinguish those leaves from the background. Right? Again, it's all about brightness and luminosity. Interestingly, though, if we're in Lightroom or Photoshop or any processing software, we can introduce tonal contrast using these sliders. And you've probably done this before. I think most people have played with black and white some. If we want that blue to look darker and that yellow to look brighter, we see these sliders, and this is in Photoshop, but it looks very similar in Lightroom. You can bring up the yellows, you can darken them, you can darken those individual colors to bring about this tonal contrast, so they're not looking the same grayscale anymore. And when we do that, there's certain relationships that do come out. Red, magenta, and green tend to look very similar in black and white. Yellow and light blue look similar. Light green and blue look identical. I do orange and blue. You could see this color wheel. You may have seen this before. It doesn't do me any good. The best way to learn how to see a color world in monochrome is just practice with it. And with time, you start noticing these things. You see a scene like this. You have these orange leaves. This is in early December. Orange leaves and this kind of bluish gray rock. Different colors, but as it turns out, same brightness, and everything just becomes just a mess in monochrome. Not surprisingly, fall colors, red, orange, yellow, even some greens in here, but their brightness values are all fairly similar. Again, it just becomes a mess in monochrome. So really the point to understand is that when you're removing color information from the photo and having your image rely only on the grayscale tones, you need to control how those tones relate to one another. You all may have seen this image before. It's one of Ansel Adams's most famous photographs, Monolith, the Face of Half Dome. And he didn't do it in darkroom. While out in the field making this image, he manipulated tonality. The sky this particular day, the story goes, even though it looks very dark black, or not dark black, but it looks dark gray and black here, the sky was actually a very milky light blue. There was a haze in the sky. And so he wanted to draw more contrast between the rock face and the sky. And so he put on a filter, a red filter on his camera in the field, which darkened Took whatever blue was in the photograph and made it dark gray, almost black, to get this photograph. So did it look like this? No. But in the field, he manipulated these color relationships, these tonal relationships in the colors. Well, that's what we can do in processing today. I forget the name of this flower. It doesn't matter. I took it in my garden a few years ago. This is the color image of it. Pretty yellow, and it's got these harmonious little blues, grape hyacinth in the background, and greens. But I converted it to black and white, but I wanted to darken that background and bring out these yellows. So I wanted to darken the colors, the green and blues, and bring out the yellow. So I hadn't hit entered yet. So this is the photo in black and white initially. And then using those color sliders you see on the right, you can see I brought the blue down, I brought the green way down, brought the yellow up. And when I hit OK, it came out with something like this. Okay. So even if the raw file or the natural scene as it appeared doesn't have a lot of tonal variation in the colors, we can introduce that. We can add that in processing to a point, as you've seen here. Another example, just saw this overhanging birch trees in springtime. You can see kind of the yellowish green leaves of the buds of the birch trees, but they're kind of being drowned out by those green cedars in the background. So converting it to black and white, and I wanted to convert it to black and white because I loved the contrast between those bright birch trunks, right? But when I converted it, you can see I took that green slider and slammed it all the way down, took the blues as well. There is some blue in that green. Took that down as well and brought up the yellow. And so introduced that brightness or luminosity of contrast you can see in the black and white version. So visualizing a scene in black and white, where you want to look at variations in tones. And again, just hitting this point, the tones in a black and white image are dependent upon the tones or areas of light and dark in the color scene. The amount of tonal contrast in the color scene will determine the amount of contrast in black and white, although we can manipulate that to a point. So talking about visualizing in black and white, what will it make a good black and white photograph? Photographed this scene a few years ago in the Adirondacks, these dead cedar trees on the shoreline of this little pond. Again, a very graphical image. And what I was really drawn to was just these dead cedar branches, especially that cedar tree on the right. It looks in color version to be kind of a, similar brightness values. It was overcast light. Those trees kind of blend with that background quite a bit, but I knew when converting it to black and white, I could darken the greens and yellows and bring up the blues. I've noticed that in any kind of photograph where there's gray, there's actually a blue quality in that gray. And so converting it to black and white came up with something like this. Helps emphasize those bright rocks on the shoreline as the scene in black and white. This is what it looked like to my eye, but I knew what I could do with it in processing. I knew it would make a strong black and white photograph. This is an obvious one, obvious black and white photograph. You already had the tonal contrast in color. Converting it to black and white was just emphasizing that more, darkening the water, the blues and the greens in that water, bringing those down and cranking the whites up a little bit more. Or just the roots in an overturned white pine, right? You just see areas of whites in this and dark grays and browns. But of course, it would work well in black and white. It simplifies it as well. There's other things going on here. It's a messy image anyway, although I like that. But black and white seems to simplify it a bit. Or this scene on an island here where I live now, a winter fog. And it's a distant island in the background. But I was just drawn to these 4 trees. So then it became just an exercise in getting rid of the flagpole and some other things in there. But also darkening that background or lightening that background. So just the trees really pop in the photograph. You get something like this. So we can play with those colors and manipulating the tonal relationships in processing. Another one, a cliff face in the Adirondacks. You had these birch trees in spring sprinkled in amongst these dark green cedars. and then you have that rock face. Very boring, overcast light. So you don't think there's not a lot of tonal contrast here, but there actually was. Of course, I was able to manipulate that in processing to bring out even more. Not infrared, still a standard black and white photograph, just bringing up uh, the yellows and greens, mostly the yellows. Going from that to that. This is a simple one. You already have the tonal contrast here. You can see the shadows and the tree trunks are dark. Color was distracting in this. I was really just drawn to the lines. And so let's just get rid of the color and just makes it a much stronger image. So I think to be effective or to make effective black and white photographs, we really have to have a good understanding of the quality of light, not the color of light, but the quality of light. I think we've all heard that one of the benefits of black and white photography is you can photograph in midday. Oftentimes, one of the conventional wisdom or rules of landscape photography is you can't photograph in the middle of a sunny day because the light's too harsh. That's true to a point, but especially with black and white photography, that harshness creates contrast, which is what we want in black and white photography. So some sandstone bluffs on Lake Ontario, middle of the day, the composition of this is really nothing much, but it's a good example of how we can use that harsh light to our advantage when we convert to black and white. Darkening that sky, taking that blue sky, which is like a mid-tone blue. It's not a dark blue. It's not a light blue. It's something in the middle, medium toned, but just bringing it down so these sandstone spires just really stand out. Or a summer afternoon, it's a calm summer afternoon on Adirondack Pond. You've got these cumulus clouds. A little bit of haze. It's summertime, but it works in color, but you can imagine what we can do with that in black and white. And just introduce a degree of drama, getting rid of the haze. I just love the texture of those clouds reflected in the pond. Midday is great for shadows as well, and that works great for black and white photography, especially in wintertime. These little botanicals casting these wonderful shadows across the glistening snow. Midday sun. Sunrise. I lost the raw file to this image, so I'm kicking myself, but I would reprocess this, but it gives you an idea of this light coming in across the mountains. Light and shadow creating this wonderful exercise or study in forms and shapes, as well as contrast. Side light, which is my favorite light to photograph in. In this instance, you have light coming in from the lake. That's your light source because it's wide open. And so there's a lot going on in this image. We talked about the visual elements. Well, you've got this wonderful form in the trees because you've got the trees lit on one side, shadow on the other, has that rounded shape to it. Great texture in the pine needles at the bottom. Also wonderfully interesting shapes in the roots of the trees as well. So shape, texture, form, as well as lines, strong lines from the pine trees, right? All those visual elements other than color coming together. And of course, even overcast light is my favorite light to work with. In most instances, I'm not a fan of high contrast black and white. I like softer scenes. I like softer scenes in color. I like softer scenes in black and white. So when you're giving me that overcast light, of course, we know that works wonderfully when we're photographing streams and waterfalls. This is the root system of a fallen willow tree, and just wonderful textures, but also tones in it. The shadows, the roots in the background, and you have these bleached roots in the foreground as well. Just magic and monochrome. There's something so simple, right? Walking along and seeing these orange pine needles underfoot, and just seeing all the various wonderful lines and shape. Again, it was more than just stripping out the orange color, though. It was really bumping up the contrast, darkening a bit, creating depth to these pine needles by adding contrast to it. We're getting close to the end here. Now we'll have time for questions and discussion. So what are some different types of black and white images? There's high key images, which I'm sure you've all heard of, where you have low key. Long exposure, which you see a lot of monochrome or black and white images that are long exposure. Think of Michael Kenna, is one of them. And low and high contrasts. So some examples of high key images. High key images, if you're not familiar, are just very bright scenes where the main subject element is contrastingly dark. Right? In this case, across a snowy field, it had these little botanicals, little winter weeds basically growing out of the top of a snow mound. So most of the scene is very bright, but then you have this contrast of the dark subject matter. Or just reeds and the reflection in the lake, right? Mostly a bright image with dark subject of interest. Low key is the opposite. It's a dark image with bright, contrasting subject matter here. In this case, a tulip tree, a young tulip tree in autumn, yellow leaves, just converted to black and white. This is in water. These little reeds that were coming up toward the surface out of this inky void. And so converting it to black and white, darkening it. So you just see the light just starting to hit those little grasses. Just some of my favorite types of scenes. Again, just a water image, darkening the water. So it's mostly dark, but then you have these little lily pads and reeds. Long exposure, oftentimes it's become almost cliche. When you see black and white images, it's long exposure. In this case, this is about a 3-minute exposure, smoothing out the water and the sky, but then a nice contrast with the boulder. Long exposure in water and streams, we're all familiar with that. Or just a lake and clouds, creating some interesting texture in the sky and then reflection in the lake as well. And finally, low contrast and high contrast scenes. As I mentioned, I'm a fan of low contrast. This was a foggy morning. These little reeds sticking out of the water and their gentle reflections. Or a stand of aspen saplings. Again, just a study in silver. Right? There's really very little black in this photograph. And no pure white either. It's mostly just light grays and medium tone grays. Very quiet. The shoreline of a lake outside of Syracuse. Again, very little black in the scene and very little white. It's just a series of grays. It's overcast skies and just working with it. It's a very soft, quiet scene. And to compare that to more high contrast scenes, this roots juxtaposed against a cliff face behind it. Or in this case, this is a very Cole Thompson type photo, if anybody's familiar with Cole Thompson. Bright cumulus clouds and taking that blue sky and just slamming it down. One of my favorite cloud images. High contrast. Normally we don't like direct sunlight on a stream, but in this case it worked well. Trying to control it both at the time of capture and in processing, so we didn't get blown out water or too dark rocks, but it adds some nice, wonderful texture to the rocks and a little bit of drama to the scene. And finally, it's monochrome, but not black and white. There's a difference. I actually prefer calling things monochrome because we can add color tints to our monochrome photos. In my photographs, many of my monochrome images have a slight warm tint to them, not sepia, nothing that dramatic, but just a touch of warmth to them that if you didn't know it, you may not see it, but once you know it, you may actually see it. This has just the slightest little bit of amber warmth added to it. This, just a foggy scene in December a few years ago. A little bit more on this one, a little bit more of an amber warm tint added to it. Sunrise, a barn in the Adirondacks. Or you can add any tint. This fallen tree with branches sticking out as well as below, as above, so below is the name of it. And for some reason, I just added a little bit of a coolness to the black and white image, a little bit of a tint to it. So it's monochrome, but with a tint added to it. And just finishing up, if you're interested, some noted black and white photographers, and there's so many more of these, but from the past, when I think of the giants whose shoulders we stand on, I love Paul Caponegro. Harry Callahan is one of my favorites. He might be my favorite. Brett and Edward Weston, father and son. And then present-day photographers. Chuck Kimmerly, you may recognize some of these names, is one of my favorites. Christer Berg is a wonderful Swedish photographer. Bruce Barnbaum, he's in his 70s now, I believe. Wonderful photographer. And of course, John Sexton, who was a one of Ansel Adams' students. Finish up with this slide. Ernst Haas. This applies to anything, not just black and white photography, but any photography. I'm not interested in shooting new things. I'm interested to see things new. That's really a challenge, isn't it? I think oftentimes when you're trying to be creative, we go to new areas, new locations. For a landscape photographer, we do. If you're not a landscape photographer, we try to, photograph different things, different subject matter, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think sometimes that's the easy way out. The more difficult way is to photograph very familiar subject matter that we may be familiar with ourselves, but seeing it in a new way or treating it in a new way, that's the real challenge. Just a couple slides here just to shameless self-promotion, I say. I do lead workshops, as Alice mentioned in my bio at the outset. This is a list of workshops for this year. You can find more information on these either on my website at the bottom, chrismurrayphotography.com, or the Adirondack Photography Institute, adkpi.org. Some of the workshops, as you see here, are through API. Some are not. That's why I have that little banner on the right-hand side. For instance, my Art of Winter workshop I have coming up here in a couple of weeks is not an API workshop. So if you want more information, you can go to my website or the API workshop, our website, and check those out. Also, since the last time I've spoken to you all, I have a brand new website as of about a little over a year ago, built brand new from the ground up. For the first time ever, I actually like my website. So if you haven't seen it yet, feel free to check it out. And while you're there, you can go to my blog. You can subscribe to my blog if you wish. You can also subscribe to my newsletter as well. I think you can do that under About or under the Contact tab. And I think that is it. Yeah, that's it. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. And if you have questions, I'd be happy to hear them and talk about them, or anything else you'd like to bring up.
Chris, can you stop your share?
Yep, gonna do that now.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. There.
Chris, I have a couple of questions. My name is Soren.
Hey, Soren.
Have you taken film photography?
Have I done film photography?
Yeah.
I started out on film, but slide film.
Okay. Then you're taking now only digital, I guess.
Yes. Yeah.
And
yeah.
From what I gather, most of the pictures you've taken were taken in color and then converted to black and white.
Correct. Yeah.
Have you taken in black and white natively, like, black and white pictures?
No, I haven't. I don't know of any digital photographer who does that. Maybe because we're all too chicken. I mean, to take it in color, you have that still there. So no. To answer your question, no. I always do.
In color.
The raw file is in color, and then
no, because I was wondering if there is any difference in between taking a picture in colors or in taking it in black.
Well, there would be. I mean, because the amount of, what I was talking about before, you can make a photograph look so different. It'll still be in monochrome, but you can do it so many different ways in processing that they look so different from one another. Still black and white. It's just there's so many things you can play with in processing there. So, in camera, what is it doing? Like I mentioned that, changing your playback screen to monochrome so you can get a preview of it, but that's just strictly color, you know what I mean? But it's more than that. So
are you taking infrared? My wife is taking infrared. She's passionate about it, but have you taken infrared photography?
I haven't,
basically.
Yeah, some of those scenes, as you saw, kind of look infrared.
Yes.
I haven't. No, I don't do infrared. And if I did, infrared can look a lot of different ways.
Oh, yeah.
For me personally, I'm not a fan of the really strong infrared, that's really out there.
Right.
It's to me, it's not that it's not about reality. I'm not about reality, obviously. I'm fine with, we're all artists. Screw, objective reality. It just looks too. I just don't like the look. But then when you see infrared, that's a little more not so, I guess, dramatic or something different. But then when I see that, I'm like, well, I can kind of get there with regular black and white. So anyway, to answer your question, no, I haven't done black and white. I haven't a camera I thought about converting. I just haven't done it yet.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
You had mentioned shooting in black and white. There are some cameras nowadays that only do black and white.
Yeah.
There's a new one, I think, from Fujichrome, and there's a Leica that's a monochrome, uh, no color
Mm.
sensors,
Hmm.
all black and white.
Hmm.
So there must be some need for it.
I guess, yeah.
You also mentioned Tom Thompson.
Hmm.
He was here last year as a guest speaker.
Okay.
So yeah,
Mhm.
he gets around. Bruce, you have a question?
He gets around.
I'm from the film age of the 70s, so
Mm.
and I've shot, like you say, tons and tons of chrome, but I've always shot black and white film, and I've had all my negatives from the 60s. And I find that when I shoot the black and white film, I only think in black and white. And when I shoot the color and convert it,
Mhm.
I always see the color.
Yeah.
So I have a very hard time converting, and I still shoot the black and white film, and I find that it's got a depth to it, which the digital doesn't.
Right.
And even going to prints, it has the depth to it. So, but it's also, the way everybody shoots. You shoot one way, I shoot another way.
Sure.
It's the end result that we hopefully are successful with.
Right.
And it's just interesting how you were saying you gotta, how do you shoot in black and white? I look at it, how do I think in black and white? And I just see in black and white. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And sometimes I shoot in color and I go, damn it, why didn't I grab my film camera and
Yep.
shoot it in black and white?
Yep.
It's
Okay,
it's
Elaine, you
nice,
have
very
your
nice
hand up.
work.
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah.
You're muted, Elaine.
Okay, I have two screens here. Okay. Right. Thank you so much, Chris. This has once again been a really informative evening, and I loved seeing your images. And I've been doing converting of a lot of my photos. I like the looks of some of them. But I noticed something in a couple of them that you showed at first that I have found, that some of the colors come through when they're converted to black and white much either brighter, or you lose the texture. They become like a dense block.
Mhm.
And I don't know. I think it's a little unfortunate. Sometimes I think about being in competition mode, and I can hear the judge say, I don't like that bright spot there. It's too bright, or that block looks dense. Where's the texture? I don't know if you can comment, and if I need to be to learn more and experience more, I think is probably the answer.
Right. Well, I think, well, I don't, I haven't, if there is no texture, it's because I've intentionally gotten rid of it. As long as, and of course this applies to color photography as well, you always look at your histogram, right? You look at your histogram after you've made the exposure in the field, but even when you're processing, you keep a sharp eye on that histogram every time you adjust anything. And because, you can obviously blow something out in processing if you wish, like, that pine needles on snow, I blew out the texture in the snow because I wanted to. So yeah, so I mean, it's, whether I do that or darken things down to just pure black, I haven't, I guess to your comment, I haven't found a problem with that, that's beyond my control. If I do it, as long as there's detail there, like I said, in the raw file, I haven't blown it out in the raw file. Either way, the blacks or the whites, then I can bring it back, if I want.
Right.
Any other question? Rich, you have a question?
Thank you.
Yes, Chris, you mentioned that one of the things you thought people might want to try is looking at their image, color image through the monochrome viewer on the back or
Mhm.
wherever it is.
Mhm.
But you showed us also pretty convincingly, and it's one of the reasons why people who try to go to black and white by just desaturating are missing so much. But aren't you just also missing enough things on when you look at a monochrome image of your color image to maybe give you a false impression of how it might look rather than after somehow you've manipulated it already by virtue of the colors that were there?
I'm not sure I'm following your
Well,
question.
you showed pretty well that when you make a conversion
Yeah.
and you change to black and white, at least one of the standard ways, you
Mhm.
get sliders based on the colors that were originally there.
Sure. Yeah.
And you can change the image itself dramatically that way.
Mhm.
But you don't get a chance to even think about that when you're looking at the back of your camera.
Oh, no, you're right. Exactly. Yeah.
So I didn't know how much that helps and sometimes how much it hurts
Yeah.
your perception of what it's going to be.
Yeah. And that's the danger of it, right? Because you might see it if you don't know any better. Like now, I mean, I never used to do that. Use the monochrome playback on my viewfinder. Um, and I still don't do it very often now. Because I found that, it could give you a false impression, thinking, oh, it looks boring, but now I would say, but now with experience, I would recognize, okay, well, yeah, there it looks boring, but I can see there's enough potential because I know I'll be able to add some, tonal contrast to it in processing. So
Right.
now with experience, I can see that. Without that experience, though, then yeah, you may just say, oh, man, forget it. It's boring. It doesn't work in black and white, and move on. So it's,
Okay. Well, thank you.
thanks for
Any other questions for Chris?
I have a question. Beautiful images. Do you have any
Thank you.
tips in terms of the best way to convert to black and white?
I say this, and it's gonna be one of those answers you hate, because it's whatever works for you. Now, what that means is you find a way that works for you. I believe when it comes to processing, I try to keep it as simple as possible. I mean, that's just my way of doing it. So, I don't use silver effects. I used to use that before in one of Nick's softwares, or it's DxO now. I just use Lightroom.
Lightroom.
Yeah, I just use Lightroom. You convert to black and white, and there's different templates that Lightroom gives you or presets.
Mhm.
It's like 1 through 12 or something like that. And what I'll do is I'll go through those. I mean, in some instances, I have a very good idea of what I want the black and white to look like. I know I want the sky dark and I want the subject to pop more. Other times, I'm not sure. Oh, and I'll see which one kind of resonates most. It's really just clicking on them and you get a preview. It's like, oh, that one I like. And I start with that preset, but then I just change, I go forward with, manipulating whatever else needs to be done. And a lot of times it's just, it could be just the exposure sliders at the top of, Lightroom. It could be, they call it the black and white mixer when you see those color sliders, because the color information is still there, as Richard was referring to a moment ago. So even though it looks black and white on your screen, that color is still there. So, you take the blue slider and bring it down, it'll darken any blue in the photo and things like that. So it's really just going through and kind of playing with those different settings in Lightroom and seeing what gets me, to where I want to be.
Great,
What I've
thank
done
you.
now over the years is I've, in Lightroom, if you work in Lightroom, you can make your own presets, right? And so for so many different images I've made, a lot of times because there was another image I made the same day in the same area. So I don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. So I'll save it as a preset. So now I have my own preset, like 20 or 30 of them. And I'll kind of go through those rather than the Lightroom presets and see which ones of those, seem to work better for this new image I have. So it's just like that, I don't do luminosity masking or anything like that. There's nothing wrong with that. I just don't see a need to do it. I just,
Right.
I just
Thank
do
you.
most
Chris
everything.
works with the KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's,
Chris,
yeah,
Chris,
yeah, because
I
I'm
just-
stupid. So, so I try to keep it simple,
Chuck, I just want to mention,
Yeah.
to Chris, every time he comes on, I really get inspired to go back and look at my photos a second time and really carefully pay attention to them, because you give me the opportunity to see that, there's so much more to something, and it's very inspiring. So I just wanted to thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, Alice. I appreciate that.
Okay, folks.
Just ask one little question. Who was the fourth photographer, the contemporary photographer that you mentioned after Bruce Brombaum?
Oh, John Sexton.
Oh,
He's really not that contemporary. He's got to be in his 70s by now, too. Yeah, John Sexton. He's probably one of Ansel Adams's most successful students, disciples, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
One of my favorite photography books of his is Listen to the Trees. It's a spectacular, just beautiful, beautiful work.
who, what?
John Sexton.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
One of his books is he's got The Quiet Light is a great one, but Listen to the Trees
Oh,
is another one. Just a beautiful collection of just black and white photography, just gorgeous.
Thank you again, Chris. Wonderful job.
Well,
I
thank
think
you,
we
everyone.
all learned a
Appreciate it.
lot.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Chris.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you,
I know,
Chris.
I
Thank you.
hesitated because I know black and white is one of those things. Obviously, you had cool times from last year, but I've seen black and white presentations, and everybody has their own take on it. So hopefully, I was able to bring something different to it.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Totally, totally. It's great.
Okay, folks, later
Thank
this
you.
week, we have the YEP meeting
you.
on Wednesday, and we have the PDI workshop on Thursday. See you all. Try to keep warm up there.